The notification sound pierced through the quiet Tuesday evening like a knife. I glanced at my phone, expecting maybe a text from my sister or a reminder about tomorrow's dentist appointment. Instead, staring back at me was an email from Jennifer Morrison with a subject line that made my stomach drop. Immediate content revision required. Due tomorrow, 7 a.m. It was 9:47 p.m. I was sitting in my pajamas, halfway through a cup of chamomile tea, trying to wind down from what had already been a 12-hour day at Meridian Creative Solutions. The campaign I'd spent 3 weeks crafting for our biggest client had been approved by Tom Rodriguez that afternoon. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The creative brief was locked. The client was thrilled. Everything was supposed to be done. But there it was, glowing accusingly from my screen. Jennifer Morrison, my husband's book club friend, who had somehow become my new department head just 6 weeks ago, had decided that my narrative approach lacked literary sophistication and needed a, quote, complete conceptual overhaul. She wanted me to start from scratch. Tonight. I stared at the message, reading it 3 times before the full weight hit me. This wasn't just another late-night request. This was sabotage dressed up as editorial feedback. Because Jennifer Morrison, with her pristine English literature PhD and her perfectly curated social media presence full of literary quotes, had made it very clear from day one that she didn't think I belonged in the same creative space as her. The worst part? My husband Mike had introduced us. He'd been gushing about his book club for months, particularly about how brilliant Jennifer was, how she could analyze the deeper meaning in any text, and had this incredible eye for storytelling. When the position opened up at Meridian, he'd actually suggested I mention her to Tom during the hiring process. He thought he was helping my career. He had no idea he'd just handed someone the perfect weapon to destroy it. The beginning should have been a warning sign, but I was too grateful to notice. Mike and I had been struggling ever since his startup hit a rough patch and cut his salary by 30%. Our Austin rent wasn't getting any cheaper, and my student loan payments still demanded their monthly tribute regardless of our financial reality. When Meridian Creative Solutions offered me the content strategy position, it felt like a lifeline. Tom Rodriguez, the creative director who hired me, was warm and encouraging. He saw potential in my digital storytelling background and promised I'd have room to grow. The team was incredible. There was Maria Santos, a brilliant graphic designer who could make any concept visual magic. James Park, a data analyst who somehow made spreadsheets tell compelling stories. And Lisa Thompson, a copywriter whose words could sell snow to penguins. We clicked immediately. We'd grab coffee together before morning meetings, bounce ideas off each other throughout the day, and celebrate every client win like it was our first. For 3 months, I thrived. My social media campaigns were generating engagement rates that made our competitors nervous. Clients specifically requested to work with me on their content strategies. Tom started including me in senior leadership discussions about company direction. I felt like I'd finally found my place in the creative world. Then came the announcement that changed everything. Tom gathered our department in the main conference room on a sweltering June morning, the kind of Texas heat that makes you grateful for aggressive air conditioning. He looked uncharacteristically uncomfortable as he shuffled through his notes. "I have some news about our team structure," he began, his usual confident tone slightly strained. "As you know, we've been growing rapidly, and leadership has decided to split our department to better serve our expanding client base. We're creating a new editorial services division that will handle all narrative content, storytelling campaigns, and literary-focused projects." My heart started racing. That was exactly the kind of work I'd been doing. The work I was good at. The work that had earned me recognition and praise. Tom continued, "I'm pleased to announce that Jennifer Morrison will be joining us as the Director of Editorial Services. Jennifer comes to us with a PhD in English literature from UT Austin, and she's been working as a narrative consultant for several Austin-based agencies. She'll be starting Monday, and Sarah, Maria, and James will be transitioning to her team." The room felt like it was spinning. Jennifer Morrison, the same Jennifer Morrison who led Mike's precious book club. The same woman who'd smiled politely at me during the 2 brief encounters we'd had at social gatherings, but whose eyes had held something I couldn't quite identify. Something cold. After the meeting, I approached Tom privately. "Did you know about my connection to Jennifer?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked genuinely confused. "Connection? I don't think so. Her application came through our standard hiring channels. Why do you ask?" I explained about Mike's book club, about how Jennifer knew my husband, about the strange interactions we'd had. Tom's expression shifted to concern, then to something that looked almost like regret. "Sarah, I want you to know that her hiring had nothing to do with any personal connections. Her credentials were impressive, and frankly, upper management was pushing for someone with more traditional literary background to lead this new division." He paused, studying my face. "Is this going to be a problem?" I forced a smile. "Of course not. I'm sure it'll be fine." But even as I said the words, I knew they weren't true, because I'd seen the way Jennifer looked at me during those book club encounters. I'd noticed how she'd subtly corrected my comments about novels we'd discussed, how she'd made little comments about people who appreciated literature on a surface level versus those who understood its deeper complexities. I'd brushed it off then, chalking it up to academic pretension. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Now she was going to be my boss. Jennifer's first week was a masterclass in passive aggression disguised as professional development. She scheduled individual meetings with each team member, ostensibly to quote, understand our current skill sets and identify growth opportunities. My meeting was scheduled for Friday at 4:30 p.m., the kind of time slot that screams afterthought. Her new office was a shrine to literary accomplishment. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 2 walls, filled with classics, contemporary fiction, and academic texts. Her diploma hung prominently behind her desk, along with photos of her with various authors at literary events. Everything was designed to communicate one clear message: this is what real intellectual authority looks like. Jennifer smiled as I entered, but it was the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. "Sarah, how wonderful to be working together officially. Mike talks about you constantly at book club." The way she said it made it sound like Mike was sharing embarrassing stories rather than expressing pride in his wife. I settled into the chair across from her desk, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. "I've been reviewing your portfolio," she continued, opening a folder that contained printouts of my recent campaigns. "There's certainly enthusiasm in your work. Very accessible, very commercial." The pause before enthusiasm was deliberate. So was the emphasis on commercial, delivered like it was something slightly distasteful. "I think there's tremendous potential for growth here," Jennifer went on, her tone taking on the patronizing quality of a professor addressing a struggling student. "Your approach tends to be quite literal, quite surface level. What I'd love to help you develop is a deeper understanding of narrative complexity, of the psychological underpinnings that make storytelling truly powerful." I felt my jaw tighten. The campaigns she was dismissing as surface level had increased client engagement by an average of 47%. They'd won 2 local advertising awards. They'd been featured in industry publications as examples of innovative digital storytelling. "I appreciate the feedback," I managed to say. "I'm always eager to learn and improve." "Wonderful." Jennifer's smile brightened, becoming somehow even more unsettling. "I think we're going to work beautifully together. Now I do want to discuss some immediate changes to current projects." She pulled out another folder, this one containing detailed notes on every campaign I was currently managing. Notes that could only have been compiled through careful observation of my work over the past several weeks. The Morrison Industries campaign, for instance. "I think we can elevate the messaging significantly. Instead of focusing on their product benefits, what if we explored the existential relationship between consumer desire and corporate responsibility? Really dig into the philosophical implications of their market positioning?" I blinked. Morrison Industries manufactured industrial air filters. Their target audience was facilities managers at manufacturing plants. They wanted clear, direct messaging about efficiency and cost savings. "I'm not sure that approach would resonate with their target demographic," I said carefully. Jennifer's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, the smile becoming slightly more forced. Sarah, this is exactly what I mean about surface-level thinking. You're limiting yourself to what the client thinks they want instead of showing them what they actually need. Great storytelling challenges audiences to think more deeply. But our research shows that their customer base responds best to straightforward, benefit-focused messaging. The current campaign is performing really well in testing. Testing? Jennifer said the word like it left a bad taste in her mouth. Sarah, we're not data analysts. We're storytellers. We're artists. We have a responsibility to elevate the discourse, not simply pander to the lowest common denominator. The meeting continued for another 20 minutes, with Jennifer systematically dismantling every project I was working on. Each criticism was delivered with the same condescending smile, the same implication that my approach was fundamentally flawed, fundamentally amateur. As I left her office, I felt something I hadn't experienced since high school. The particular humiliation of being made to feel stupid by someone who was supposed to be on my side. But this was worse than high school, because Jennifer wasn't just some random mean girl. She was someone my husband admired, someone he'd specifically recommended, someone he thought was helping my career. That evening, Mike was bubbling with excitement as he prepared for book club. How was your first week with Jennifer? I can't wait to hear how it's going. She's so brilliant, Sarah. I think you're going to learn so much from her. I looked at my husband, at his genuine enthusiasm, at the way his eyes lit up when he talked about his literary discussions with Jennifer Morrison. I thought about telling him what the week had really been like, about the subtle undermining, about the way Jennifer had made me feel like an intellectual imposter in my own workplace. Instead, I smiled and said, "It's been interesting. She definitely has strong opinions about storytelling." Mike grinned. That's what makes her so amazing. She sees layers that other people miss. She's going to be such a good influence on your career. As he headed out the door, chattering about the novel they were discussing that week, I sat alone in our living room and wondered if I was being paranoid. Maybe Jennifer's feedback was legitimate. Maybe I was being too sensitive. Maybe her academic background really could help me grow as a storyteller. Those doubts lasted exactly until Monday morning, when I found Jennifer had completely rewritten the Morrison Industries campaign without consulting me. The new version was a pretentious mess of flowery language and abstract concepts that would have made a philosophy professor proud and a facilities manager confused. She'd sent it directly to the client with a note explaining that the previous version had been revised to better reflect sophisticated narrative principles. The client hated it. They called Tom directly, expressing confusion and concern about the dramatic shift in messaging. Tom called me into his office, his face a mixture of frustration and bewilderment. "Sarah, what happened with Morrison Industries? They're saying the new campaign doesn't make any sense for their business." I explained what Jennifer had done, trying to keep my voice neutral and professional. Tom's expression grew increasingly troubled as I spoke. "She sent revised creative directly to a client without running it through me?" he asked. "Apparently. I found out about it when the client called me this morning to ask what was going on." Tom rubbed his temples. "This is not how we operate. All client communications go through department heads. Jennifer should know this." He promised to address it with Jennifer immediately, and I left his office feeling slightly vindicated. Maybe this was just a misunderstanding. Maybe Jennifer would adjust to our company culture and things would smooth out. I was naive to think it would be that simple. Because Jennifer Morrison hadn't just rewritten my campaign, she declared war on my career, and she was just getting started. Jennifer's response to Tom's conversation was swift and calculated. She scheduled a team meeting for the following afternoon, ostensibly to, quote, clarify communication protocols and establish creative standards. The conference room felt smaller than usual as our newly restructured team gathered around the polished table. Jennifer had prepared a presentation, complete with slides that looked like they belonged in a graduate seminar rather than a marketing agency. "I want to address some concerns that have been raised about our departmental processes," she began, her voice carrying the measured authority of someone accustomed to lecturing. "It seems there's been some confusion about creative decision-making and client relationships." She clicked to her first slide, which displayed a pyramid diagram titled Hierarchy of Narrative Excellence. At the top sat literary sophistication, followed by conceptual depth, then aesthetic appeal, and finally, at the very bottom, commercial viability. What I want everyone to understand, Jennifer continued, her gaze lingering meaningfully on me, is that our role as storytellers extends far beyond simply giving clients what they think they want. We have an obligation to elevate the cultural conversation, to challenge conventional thinking, to refuse to participate in the dumbing down of American discourse. Maria shifted uncomfortably in her seat. James was taking notes, but his expression suggested he was as confused as I felt. This wasn't a discussion about communication protocols. This was Jennifer establishing her creative philosophy as department gospel. Now, regarding the Morrison Industries situation, Jennifer said, and I felt my stomach clench. I want to be very clear that the original approach, while enthusiastic, fundamentally misunderstood the client's deeper needs. Yes, they manufacture air filters, but what they're really selling is peace of mind, environmental consciousness, the promise of a cleaner future. The previous campaign treated them like a commodity business, when they could be positioned as environmental philosophers. She clicked to the next slide, which showed the campaign I'd developed side by side with her revision. Mine was labeled surface-level approach. Hers was labeled sophisticated narrative integration. I sent the revised version to the client as an educational opportunity, Jennifer explained. Sometimes clients need to see the difference between adequate and exceptional before they can appreciate the value of literary thinking. I couldn't stay silent any longer. But Jennifer, the client specifically said they didn't understand the new messaging. They've been in business for 30 years. They know their customers better than we do. Jennifer's smile was patient in the way that made you feel like a child who just interrupted an important adult conversation. Sarah, this is exactly the kind of thinking I'm hoping to help you move beyond. Just because something has been done a certain way for 30 years doesn't mean it's the right way. Progress requires challenging established assumptions. But what about the data? James interjected. Sarah's original campaign tested really well with the target demographic. The engagement metrics were strong. Metrics, Jennifer repeated, and the disdain in her voice was unmistakable. James, I appreciate your analytical perspective, but we're not running a factory here. We're creating art. Shakespeare didn't write Hamlet based on focus group data. Toni Morrison didn't structure Beloved around engagement metrics. Great storytelling transcends the limitations of market research. The comparison was so absurd that I almost laughed. We weren't writing literary masterpieces. We were creating marketing campaigns for industrial air filters. But Jennifer delivered the statement with such conviction that questioning it would have seemed like questioning literature itself. Maria raised her hand tentatively. So are we supposed to ignore client feedback if it doesn't align with our creative vision? We're supposed to educate our clients, Jennifer replied firmly. We're supposed to show them possibilities they never knew existed. If we simply give them what they ask for, we're nothing more than glorified order takers. The meeting continued for another 45 minutes, with Jennifer systematically deconstructing every successful project our team had completed over the past year. Each campaign was reframed as a missed opportunity for deeper meaning, more sophisticated messaging, greater literary merit. By the time she dismissed us, I felt like everything I thought I knew about my own professional competence had been called into question. Walking back to my desk, Maria fell into step beside me. What the hell was that? She whispered. I honestly don't know, I replied, keeping my voice low. It's like she thinks we're running a creative writing workshop instead of a marketing agency. Did you see Tom's face when she was talking about ignoring client feedback? He looked like he was going to have a stroke. Tom's expression had indeed been telling. As Jennifer had outlined her philosophy of creative independence from client input, his jaw had tightened progressively. Meridian Creative Solutions had built its reputation on collaborative relationships with clients, on understanding their businesses deeply enough to tell their stories authentically. Jennifer's approach was antithetical to everything the company stood for, but Tom was in a difficult position. Jennifer had been hired specifically by upper management, brought in to elevate the company's creative profile. Challenging her methods too directly, too soon, would reflect poorly on the decision-makers who'd approved her hiring. He was walking a tightrope between protecting his team and protecting his own career. Over the next 2 weeks, Jennifer's management style crystallized into a pattern that was both subtle and devastating. She would wait until I'd developed a campaign concept, sometimes spending days perfecting the messaging and visual elements, then swoop in with enhancements that fundamentally altered the entire approach. These weren't collaborative discussions or constructive feedback sessions. They were hostile takeovers disguised as mentorship. The Turner & Associates project was a perfect example. Turner was a mid-sized accounting firm looking to rebrand themselves as approachable and trustworthy, particularly for small business owners who found financial services intimidating. I'd created a campaign around the concept of financial storytelling, positioning Turner's accountants as translators who could help small business owners understand their own financial narratives. The messaging was warm, accessible, and grounded in research about small business owner anxieties around financial management. The visual identity used clean, friendly typography and a color palette that felt professional, but not intimidating. Turner's managing partner had loved the initial presentation, calling it exactly what we were hoping for but couldn't articulate ourselves. 2 days before the final deliverables were due, Jennifer announced that she'd refined the concept. When she showed me her revision, I barely recognized my own work. The financial storytelling concept had been replaced with narrative accounting, the existential mathematics of enterprise. The warm, accessible messaging had been replaced with dense, academic language about the intersection of fiscal reality and entrepreneurial mythology. I think you'll find this approach much more intellectually rigorous, Jennifer explained as she walked me through the changes. Instead of pandering to small business owners' insecurities, we're challenging them to think about their financial lives as epic narratives. It's much more empowering. But Jennifer, this language is going to alienate exactly the audience they're trying to reach. Small business owners don't want to feel like they need a philosophy degree to understand their accountant's marketing. Sarah, you're underestimating your audience again. People are capable of more sophisticated thinking than you give them credit for. Sometimes the best thing we can do is expect more from them. The Turner presentation was a disaster. The managing partner sat through Jennifer's explanation of existential mathematics with an expression of barely contained bewilderment. When she finished, there was a long, uncomfortable silence before he spoke. I'm sorry, but I don't understand what any of this means. Are you saying we should tell potential clients that accounting is like writing a novel? Because I don't think that's going to help anyone feel more comfortable with their taxes. Jennifer launched into a 15-minute explanation of narrative theory and its applications to financial services, but the client's confusion only deepened. Finally, Tom intervened, promising to revisit the conceptual framework and schedule a follow-up meeting. After the client left, Tom asked to speak with Jennifer privately. Through his office windows, I could see their conversation becoming increasingly animated. Jennifer's gestures were sharp and defensive, while Tom's body language suggested barely controlled frustration. When Jennifer emerged from the meeting, her carefully maintained composure had cracked slightly. She walked directly to my desk, her smile more forced than usual. Sarah, I need you to prepare a revised version of the Turner campaign for tomorrow morning. Something more commercially oriented, she said. Commercially oriented, like it was a diagnosis of a mildly embarrassing medical condition. Should I go back to my original concept? I asked. Use your judgment, she replied curtly, then turned and walked away. I stayed late that night, reconstructing the campaign that Jennifer had dismantled. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was essentially undoing my boss's improvements to save my own work. But as I rebuilt the messaging and visual elements, I felt a familiar satisfaction. This was good work. It was smart, strategic, and audience-focused. It was everything Jennifer's version wasn't. The next day's presentation went smoothly. Turner's managing partner was relieved and enthusiastic, praising the team for really understanding what we were looking for. Tom seemed visibly relaxed for the first time in weeks. Even Jennifer managed a tight smile, though she spent most of the meeting taking notes rather than presenting. But my small victory came with a price. That afternoon, Jennifer sent me an email requesting a performance review conversation for the following morning. The subject line was professional, but something about the timing felt ominous. Her office had acquired new additions since my last visit. A bulletin board displayed printouts of literary criticism articles, and her desk now featured a small stack of business books with titles like The Art of Corporate Storytelling and Narrative Leadership in the Modern Economy. Everything was positioned to be visible from the guest chair, a not-so-subtle reminder of her intellectual credentials. "Sarah, I wanted to check in about your adjustment to our new departmental culture," Jennifer began, her tone carefully neutral. "I've noticed some resistance to the elevated approach we've been implementing. I'm not sure I understand what you mean by resistance. Well, the Turner situation, for instance. After we'd developed a sophisticated conceptual framework, you seemed eager to revert to more conventional messaging. It suggests a certain comfort level with mediocrity that concerns me." I felt heat rising in my cheeks. The client specifically said they didn't understand the concepts we were presenting. I was trying to make sure we delivered something they could actually use. "But Sarah, don't you see how limiting that perspective is? If we only create work that clients immediately understand, we're not growing them or ourselves. We're just confirming their existing biases and limitations." Jennifer leaned forward, her expression taking on the earnest intensity of someone sharing profound wisdom. "When I was completing my dissertation, my advisor used to say that the best intellectual work makes people slightly uncomfortable. It should challenge their assumptions, force them to think in new ways. That's how real progress happens." "But this isn't academic research," I said, struggling to keep my voice level. "These are businesses with real goals and real customers. If our messaging doesn't connect with their audience, it doesn't matter how intellectually sophisticated it is." "And that," Jennifer said, settling back in her chair with a satisfied expression, "is exactly the kind of thinking that keeps the marketing industry trapped in a cycle of lowest common denominator pandering." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Jennifer systematically dismantling every aspect of my professional approach. My focus on audience research was intellectually lazy. My emphasis on clear communication was aesthetically impoverished. My concern for client satisfaction was creatively limiting. By the time I left her office, I felt like I'd been carefully and methodically demolished. Every strength I thought I brought to my work had been reframed as a weakness. Every success recontextualized as a failure of imagination. That evening, Mike was particularly excited about book club. Jennifer had assigned the group to read David Foster Wallace's Infinite Jest, and he'd been struggling through its dense, complex narrative for weeks. Jennifer's analysis of the recursive footnote structure was incredible tonight, he gushed as he kicked off his shoes. She showed us how Wallace uses textual fragmentation to mirror the psychological fragmentation of his characters. I never would have caught that on my own. He launched into a detailed recap of Jennifer's insights, his enthusiasm growing as he described her interpretations of postmodern narrative techniques and their relationship to contemporary alienation. Listening to him, I could understand why Jennifer's approach was so seductive. She made complex ideas sound profound and accessible simultaneously. She made people feel sophisticated for understanding her perspectives. "How are things going with her at work?" Mike asked eventually. "You don't talk about it much." I considered my options. I could tell him about the performance review, about feeling intellectually inadequate, about the way Jennifer seemed determined to undermine my confidence. But Mike was so clearly enamored with Jennifer's brilliance that criticizing her would sound like sour grapes. It would make me seem petty and unprofessional. "It's challenging," I said finally. "She has very strong opinions about creative work." "That's what makes her so amazing," Mike replied. "She's not afraid to push people toward excellence. She told us tonight that mediocrity is a choice, and that the best gift you can give someone is to refuse to accept their limitations." As Mike continued praising Jennifer's wisdom, I wondered if he was right. Maybe I was being defensive. Maybe my resistance to her feedback was exactly the kind of mediocrity she was trying to eliminate. Maybe I needed to be more open to her guidance, more willing to step outside my creative comfort zone. Those doubts lasted until the next morning, when I discovered that Jennifer had scheduled a client meeting without informing me. She'd arranged to present a, quote, strategic creative review to 3 of our biggest accounts, ostensibly to, quote, introduce them to our new narrative philosophy. The meeting was scheduled for that afternoon, and I found out about it only when Maria mentioned seeing it on Jennifer's calendar. I knocked on Jennifer's office door, my heart racing with a mixture of anger and anxiety. Jennifer, I just heard about the client meeting this afternoon. Shouldn't the account teams be involved in strategic presentations? She looked up from her computer with an expression of mild surprise. Oh, Sarah. Yes, I meant to mention that to you. I thought it would be more effective to present our new approach without the distraction of operational details. Sometimes account managers can get bogged down in tactical concerns when we're trying to communicate bigger picture concepts. But these are my clients, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. I've been working with Turner for 6 months and Riverside Industries for over a year. They're going to expect me to be there. And that's exactly the problem, Jennifer replied, her tone taking on the patient quality she used when explaining obvious concepts to slow students. Your relationships with these clients are built around their existing expectations and comfort levels. If we're going to elevate their thinking, we need to create some space from those limiting dynamics. You're meeting with my clients without me. I'm meeting with our clients to expand their creative horizons. There's a difference. The distinction was meaningless, and we both knew it. Jennifer was systematically removing me from my own professional relationships, positioning herself as the intellectual authority while relegating me to administrative support. That afternoon, I sat at my desk trying to focus on other projects, while Jennifer met with Turner, Riverside Industries, and Centennial Bank in the large conference room. Through the glass walls, I could see her animated presentations, the same academic slides she'd shown our team, the same pyramid diagram about narrative excellence. The meeting ran long, stretching past 5 o'clock into the evening. When the clients finally left, their expressions were varied. Turner's representative looked confused, but politely engaged. Riverside's marketing director seemed intrigued, but uncertain. Centennial's vice president appeared frustrated and somewhat annoyed. Tom emerged from the conference room looking like he'd aged several years over the course of the afternoon. He stopped by my desk on his way back to his office. Sarah, can we talk tomorrow morning? First thing? The tone in his voice told me everything I needed to know. The meeting hadn't gone well, and somehow, that was going to become my problem to solve. Tom's office felt different the next morning. The usually cheerful space, decorated with award plaques and photos from successful campaign launches, seemed heavy with unspoken tension. He gestured for me to close the door behind me, and I knew immediately that this conversation was going to change everything. Sarah, I need to be direct with you about what happened yesterday, Tom began, rubbing his temples in a gesture that had become increasingly familiar over the past month. The client feedback was challenging. He opened a folder on his desk and pulled out several printed emails. Turner's managing partner sent this at 11 last night. Riverside followed up an hour later. Centennial called me personally this morning before I even got to the office. I sat forward in my chair, my stomach nodding with anticipation. What did they say? Tom handed me the first email. Turner's managing partner had written a polite but firm message expressing confusion about the new creative direction and requesting clarification about whether Meridian was still the right fit for their straightforward business communication needs. The tone was diplomatic, but the underlying message was clear. They were reconsidering the relationship. Riverside's feedback was more direct. Their marketing director had written a 3-paragraph email questioning whether Meridian understood their industry and target market. The presentation felt more like a graduate seminar than a marketing strategy session, she'd written. We're concerned that your team may be losing sight of our business objectives. But Centennial's response was the most damaging. Their vice president had been blunt to the point of rudeness. We've been working with Meridian for 3 years because of their practical approach and clear communication. If this represents your new company direction, we need to discuss whether to continue our partnership. I handed the emails back to Tom, feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. These weren't just client complaints. These were relationship-ending ultimatums from 3 of our most important accounts. Tom, I had no idea Jennifer was planning to present that material to clients. If I'd been there, I could have helped translate her concepts into something more accessible. That's exactly the problem, Tom replied, his frustration finally breaking through his professional composure. You shouldn't have to translate anything. Our creative work should speak directly to client needs, not require interpretation. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling for a moment before continuing. Sarah, I'm going to be honest with you. Jennifer's approach is creating serious problems. But she was hired by senior management specifically to elevate our creative standards. Challenging her methods puts me in a very difficult position politically. I understood what he wasn't saying. Tom was caught between protecting his team and protecting his own career. Criticizing Jennifer too directly would reflect poorly on the executives who'd approved her hiring. But allowing her to continue alienating major clients would ultimately destroy the department he'd spent years building. "What do you need me to do?" I asked. "I need you to schedule follow-up meetings with all 3 clients. Today, if possible. We need to do damage control, and frankly, you're the only one they trust right now." Tom's expression was grim. "But Sarah, I also need you to understand that Jennifer isn't going to like being bypassed. You're walking into a minefield." I spent the morning on the phone with client contacts, carefully positioning the follow-up meetings as quote, creative clarification sessions rather than emergency damage control. All 3 agreed to meet, but their tones ranged from skeptical to barely tolerant. Turner's managing partner was particularly pointed. "We need to understand whether Meridian still operates the same way we've come to expect." By noon, I had 3 meetings scheduled for the rest of the week. As I was updating my calendar, Jennifer appeared at my desk. Her usual composed smile was slightly strained, and her voice carried an edge I hadn't heard before. "Sarah, I understand you've been scheduling client meetings. I think we should discuss coordination protocol. Tom asked me to set up some follow-up conversations to clarify yesterday's presentation," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. "And you didn't think to include me in these conversations?" The question hung in the air between us, loaded with implications. Jennifer wasn't just asking about meeting logistics. She was asserting her authority, demanding to know why I thought I could manage client relationships without her oversight. "I assumed you'd want to be involved. Should I send you the meeting invitations?" Jennifer's smile became more forced. "What I want, Sarah, is for you to understand that these clients need to adjust their expectations, not the other way around. Scheduling meetings to clarify sophisticated creative concepts sends the message that we're willing to compromise our standards for their comfort level." But Jennifer, they're genuinely confused about the direction. Turner specifically said they didn't understand how the new approach connects to their business goals. "And that's exactly my point," Jennifer replied, her voice taking on the lecturing tone I'd come to dread. "We're not here to make clients comfortable. We're here to expand their thinking. If Turner can't appreciate the sophisticated narrative framework we've developed for them, maybe they're not the right client for our elevated approach." The suggestion was so breathtakingly arrogant that I was momentarily speechless. Turner represented nearly 15% of our department's annual revenue. They'd been a loyal client for over 4 years, consistently praising our work and referring new business to us. The idea that we should consider ending the relationship because they didn't appreciate Jennifer's academic theories was professional suicide. "Jennifer, I think there might be a middle ground here. What if we took your concepts and found ways to present them in language that resonates more clearly with their business objectives?" "Sarah, do you hear yourself right now? You're suggesting that we dumb down our work to accommodate intellectual limitations. That's exactly the kind of thinking that keeps the marketing industry trapped in mediocrity." Jennifer leaned closer to my desk, her voice dropping to a more intimate tone that somehow made the conversation feel even more threatening. "I'm beginning to wonder if you're really committed to the creative evolution we're implementing here. Your first instinct is always to retreat to safe, conventional approaches rather than pushing boundaries." "I'm committed to serving our clients effectively," I replied, trying to match her quiet tone while fighting the urge to escalate. "And I'm committed to elevating the entire industry," Jennifer countered. "Sometimes that requires making difficult choices about who we're willing to work with." The conversation ended with Jennifer walking away, leaving me staring at my computer screen with a growing sense of dread. She hadn't explicitly forbidden me from meeting with the clients, but her message was clear. Any attempt to repair the relationships she'd damaged would be viewed as insubordination. That evening, I tried to focus on preparing for the client meetings, but concentration was nearly impossible. Every time I started working on presentation materials, I found myself second-guessing every decision. Should I acknowledge Jennifer's concepts and try to build on them? Should I pretend the previous presentations never happened? Should I directly contradict my own boss's creative direction? Mike found me at the kitchen table at 10 o'clock, surrounded by printed emails and half-finished presentation notes. "You look stressed," he observed, settling into the chair across from me. "Everything okay at work?" I looked at my husband, at his genuine concern, at the way he was clearly trying to be supportive. Over the past month, our conversations about work had become increasingly strained. Every time I expressed frustration with Jennifer, Mike would respond with stories about her brilliance, her insights, her inspiring leadership. He wasn't trying to be dismissive, but his admiration for her made it impossible for him to understand my perspective. "Just some challenging client situations," I said, which was technically true. "Is Jennifer helping you work through them?" "She's so good at seeing the bigger picture in complex situations." I forced a smile. "She definitely has strong opinions about client management." Mike's face lit up. "She was talking about that at book club last week. She said that one of the biggest problems in creative industries is that people compromise their vision to please clients who don't understand artistic value. She thinks artists have a responsibility to educate their audiences rather than just giving them what they expect." As Mike continued enthusiastically recounting Jennifer's theories about artistic integrity, I felt a familiar knot forming in my stomach. Every week he came home from book club with new Jennifer wisdom, new insights about creativity and leadership and professional excellence. To him, she was a mentor figure who was helping expand his intellectual horizons. To me, she was a professional threat who seemed determined to undermine everything I'd worked to build. "Mike," I said carefully, "what would you do if you disagreed with Jennifer about something important?" He looked genuinely puzzled by the question. "I can't imagine disagreeing with her about anything important. She's so thoughtful and well-informed. If I thought I disagreed with her, I'd probably assume I was missing something and ask her to explain her perspective more thoroughly." The answer was everything I'd feared. Mike didn't just admire Jennifer, he'd essentially abdicated his own judgment in favor of hers. In his mind, disagreeing with Jennifer was evidence of intellectual inadequacy rather than legitimate professional differences. I spent the rest of the evening preparing for my client meetings in solitude, knowing that I was walking into conversations that would either save 3 crucial business relationships or end my career at Meridian Creative Solutions. Jennifer had made it clear that accommodating client concerns was a betrayal of creative principles. Tom had made it equally clear that losing these clients would be a department-level disaster. The Turner meeting was scheduled for Thursday morning, and as I walked into their conference room, I felt like I was carrying the weight of everyone's expectations. Turner's managing partner was polite but noticeably cooler than usual. Their marketing coordinator, who normally greeted me with friendly enthusiasm, seemed guarded and uncertain. "Sarah, we appreciate you taking the time to meet with us," the managing partner began. "We wanted to discuss some concerns about the creative direction Meridian seems to be taking." I had prepared for this moment, but sitting across from clients who'd trusted me for months while trying to explain my boss's inexplicable behavior felt impossible. How do you tell loyal clients that your new department head considers their business needs intellectually beneath serious consideration? "I understand there was some confusion about the presentation earlier this week," I said, choosing my words carefully. "I wanted to make sure we're aligned on your communication objectives and find the best way to achieve them." "Sarah, we've always appreciated Meridian's straightforward approach," the marketing coordinator interjected. "Your campaigns have been effective because they speak directly to our customers' needs. This new, philosophical approach doesn't seem to connect with our reality." I nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and anxiety. They were giving me an opening to distance myself from Jennifer's approach, but taking it would be a direct contradiction of my boss's explicit instructions. What if we explored ways to incorporate some elevated creative concepts while maintaining clear communication about your core business benefits? I suggested, trying to find middle ground that might satisfy both Jennifer's demands and the client's needs. The managing partner leaned forward. "Sarah, can I be direct with you? We don't need elevated creative concepts. We need campaigns that help us sell air filtration systems to facility managers. If Meridian can't provide that anymore, we need to know now so we can make other arrangements." The ultimatum was delivered kindly but firmly. They weren't interested in compromise or creative education. They wanted practical, effective marketing that served their business objectives. Everything Jennifer stood for was antithetical to what they valued about our relationship. I made a decision that I knew would have consequences. I understand completely, and I want to assure you that Meridian remains committed to delivering practical, results-focused creative work. What you experienced earlier this week doesn't represent a fundamental shift in our approach. It was more of an experimental presentation that didn't land as intended. The lie came easily, but it felt like jumping off a cliff. I was directly contradicting Jennifer's stated philosophy and positioning her sophisticated narrative framework as a failed experiment. If she found out about this conversation, my job at Meridian would be over. But Turner's managing partner visibly relaxed. That's exactly what we needed to hear. We were genuinely concerned that Meridian was moving in a direction that wouldn't work for businesses like ours. The rest of the meeting went smoothly. We discussed their upcoming campaign needs, reviewed timeline expectations, and restored the collaborative tone that had characterized our relationship before Jennifer's arrival. By the time I left their office, the immediate crisis had been averted. But I knew that my solution was temporary at best. I'd bought time by essentially promising that Jennifer's approach was an aberration, rather than the new departmental standard. When she discovered what I'd done, the conflict that had been simmering beneath the surface would finally explode into open warfare. The Riverside meeting that afternoon followed a similar pattern. Their marketing director was more diplomatic than Turner's team, but her concerns were identical. She wanted reassurance that Meridian could still deliver practical, business-focused creative work. I gave her the same assurances I'd given Turner, knowing that each promise was another step toward an inevitable confrontation with Jennifer. By Friday morning, I'd successfully salvaged all 3 client relationships. Turner, Riverside, and Centennial had all agreed to continue working with Meridian, reassured that the confusing presentations they'd received were anomalies rather than the new normal. Tom was visibly relieved when I reported the outcomes of the meetings. "Sarah, you've literally saved our department this week," he said, shaking his head in amazement. "I don't know how you managed to repair those relationships, but I'm incredibly grateful." I wanted to tell him exactly how I'd managed it, but doing so would force him to choose between supporting my approach and supporting Jennifer's authority. Instead, I simply said that the clients had been more flexible than expected. But Jennifer's response to the successful meetings was exactly what I'd anticipated. She scheduled another performance review conversation for Monday morning, and the tone of her email invitation suggested that this would be significantly less pleasant than our previous discussions. I spent the weekend in a state of anxious preparation, knowing that the fragile peace I'd negotiated with our clients was about to be shattered by the woman whose creative vision I'd systematically undermined in order to save it. Monday morning arrived with the oppressive weight of an impending storm. I arrived at the office early, hoping to catch up on projects before my meeting with Jennifer, but concentration was impossible. Every email notification made my heart race. Every footstep in the hallway made me wonder if she'd moved up our appointment time. At exactly 9 o'clock, I knocked on Jennifer's office door. She called for me to enter without looking up from her computer, a power move I'd seen her deploy with increasing frequency over the past month. When she finally acknowledged my presence, her expression was carefully neutral, but something cold flickered behind her eyes. "Sarah, please sit down. We have quite a bit to discuss." Jennifer's desk was more organized than usual, with several manila folders arranged in a precise line. She opened the first folder and pulled out printed copies of emails, meeting notes, and what appeared to be detailed timeline documentation. The level of preparation was both impressive and terrifying. "I've been reviewing your client interactions over the past week," she began, her voice carrying the measured tone of someone delivering a carefully rehearsed speech. "Specifically, your conversations with Turner, Riverside, and Centennial following their strategic creative presentations." She slid a printed email across the desk toward me. I recognized it immediately as a follow-up message I'd sent to Turner's managing partner, confirming the points we'd discussed in our meeting and outlining next steps for their upcoming campaign. "Would you mind explaining what you meant when you told Turner that their concerns about creative direction were, quote, completely valid, and that we would, quote, return to a more business-focused approach?" The question was delivered with surgical precision. Jennifer had clearly obtained copies of my client communications. either through our shared email system or by requesting them directly from Tom. Every word I'd written to reassure anxious clients was now being used as evidence of insubordination. I was trying to rebuild their confidence in our working relationship, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. They were genuinely concerned about whether Meridian was still the right fit for their needs. And rather than educating them about the value of sophisticated creative thinking, you chose to validate their resistance to intellectual growth. Jennifer's tone remained calm, but the accusation was clear. You essentially told them that they were right to reject elevated creative concepts in favor of conventional approaches. She opened the second folder and pulled out another set of documents. These were internal emails between Tom and upper management, discussing the client feedback from Jennifer's presentations. I wasn't supposed to have access to these communications, which meant Jennifer had either been copied on them or had requested them specifically for this meeting. I'm also concerned about the pattern of undermining I'm seeing in your approach to departmental initiatives, Jennifer continued. According to these documents, you've been positioning yourself as the solution to problems that you helped create through your resistance to our new creative standards. The logic was so twisted that I almost didn't know how to respond. Jennifer was blaming me for the client relationship crises that her own presentations had caused, then criticizing me for fixing problems she'd created. It was like being accused of arson for calling the fire department. Jennifer, the clients were confused because the presentations didn't connect with their business objectives. I was trying to help them understand how our work could still serve their needs. By telling them that our work was wrong, Jennifer replied sharply. By assuring them that we would abandon the sophisticated approach we'd developed in favor of whatever made them most comfortable. She pulled out a third folder, this one containing what appeared to be a formal document with official Meridian letterhead. My stomach dropped as I realized what I was looking at. Sarah, I've documented a pattern of behavior that I believe is detrimental to our department's mission and our company's creative reputation. I've prepared a formal performance improvement plan that outlines specific areas where your approach needs to change. Jennifer handed me the document, and I scanned it with growing horror. The performance improvement plan was 3 pages long, detailing alleged deficiencies in my creative vision, collaborative skills, and commitment to excellence. Each criticism was carefully worded to sound professional, while systematically demolishing my competence as a creative professional. The performance improvement plan felt like holding a weapon designed specifically to destroy my career. Each bullet point was crafted with legal precision, creating a paper trail that would justify my eventual termination while making it appear entirely merit-based. Jennifer had clearly spent considerable time consulting with HR to ensure every word would withstand scrutiny. You have 30 days to demonstrate significant improvement in these areas, Jennifer explained, her voice taking on the formal tone of someone reading from a script. We'll have weekly check-ins to monitor your progress, and I'll be documenting all interactions to ensure we're providing you with adequate support during this improvement period. The phrase adequate support was particularly galling, delivered as if Jennifer was doing me a favor by systematically documenting my alleged failures. I understood the game she was playing. The weekly check-ins would become opportunities to find new evidence of my inadequacy. Every project, every client interaction, every creative decision would be scrutinized for signs that I wasn't embracing her vision of intellectual sophistication. Jennifer, I need to understand something, I said, setting the document down carefully. Are you saying that successfully maintaining client relationships is now considered poor performance? I'm saying that maintaining client relationships by compromising creative integrity is poor performance, she replied. Sarah, you seem to believe that client satisfaction is our primary objective, but our real responsibility is to elevate the entire industry, even if that makes some clients uncomfortable in the short term. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Jennifer outlining her expectations for my improvement in excruciating detail. I was to stop prioritizing client comfort over creative growth. I was to embrace intellectual risk-taking in my campaign development. I was to demonstrate thought leadership rather than order-taking in client relationships. Each requirement was impossible to meet while actually serving our clients effectively. Jennifer had created a performance framework that ensured failure, then positioned that failure as evidence of my professional inadequacy. When I finally left her office, I felt like I'd been professionally assassinated with surgical precision. The document in my hands represented weeks of careful planning, legal consultation, and strategic positioning. Jennifer hadn't just decided to fire me. She'd built an elaborate case to justify destroying my reputation in the process. Maria was waiting by my desk when I returned, her expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. "How did it go?" she asked quietly. I showed her the performance improvement plan, watching her eyes widen as she read through the criticisms. "This is insane," she whispered. "Half of these complaints are about you being too good at your job." "That's exactly the point," I replied, sinking into my chair. "She's made client satisfaction a liability instead of an asset." James appeared at my cubicle, having clearly noticed the serious conversation happening at my desk. When Maria showed him the document, his expression shifted from confusion to outrage. "She's criticizing you for overdependence on market research?" he asked incredulously. "Sarah, your research-based campaigns have the highest conversion rates in the company. This is ridiculous." But ridiculous or not, the performance improvement plan was now part of my official employment record. I had 30 days to either transform myself into the kind of creative professional Jennifer wanted, or find myself unemployed with a documented history of performance problems. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the document while Mike prepared dinner. The familiar sounds of chopping vegetables and sizzling pans provided a comforting backdrop to my professional crisis, but I couldn't bring myself to tell him what had happened. "How do you explain to your husband that his intellectual hero is systematically destroying your career?" "You're quiet tonight," Mike observed, glancing over from the stove. "Everything okay?" "Just thinking through some work challenges," I replied, which was becoming my standard response to his questions about my job. "Are you and Jennifer finding your rhythm yet? I know it can take time to adjust to working with someone who has such high standards." The phrase high standards hit me like a physical blow. Mike genuinely believed that Jennifer's behavior represented professional excellence rather than systematic harassment. In his mind, my struggles with her management style were evidence of my own limitations rather than her destructive approach. "Mike, what would you think if Jennifer gave you a performance improvement plan criticizing you for things you thought were strengths?" He paused in his cooking, considering the question seriously. "I'd probably assume I was missing something important about what real excellence looks like. Jennifer has such a clear vision of quality that if she thought I needed improvement, I'd want to understand her perspective and work harder to meet her standards." The answer confirmed my worst fears. Mike had essentially decided that Jennifer's judgment was infallible. Any criticism from her was automatically legitimate. Any conflict with her was automatically my fault. I was completely alone in recognizing that her behavior was destructive rather than demanding. Over the next week, Jennifer's weekly check-ins became exercises in creative gaslighting. She would review my work with the kind of detailed criticism usually reserved for doctoral dissertations, finding intellectual inadequacies in marketing campaigns for local restaurants and retail stores. A campaign for a family-owned bakery was criticized for failing to explore the socio-cultural implications of artisanal food production. An advertisement for a sporting goods store was deemed aesthetically impoverished because it focused on product benefits rather than, quote, the philosophical relationship between competition and self-actualization. Each critique was delivered with the same patient tone, as if Jennifer was helping me understand obvious truths that I'd somehow missed. She would reference literary theory, cultural criticism, and postmodern philosophy as if these academic frameworks were naturally applicable to small business marketing. When I pointed out that our clients were looking for practical results rather than intellectual discourse, she would note my comments as further evidence of resistance to creative growth. The most insidious aspect of Jennifer's approach was how reasonable it sounded in isolation. Taken individually, each criticism could be defended as pushing for higher creative standards. It was only when viewed as a pattern that the true destructiveness became clear. She was systematically undermining my confidence, my professional relationships, and my standing within the company, while maintaining the appearance of constructive management. Tom began showing signs of strain, as Jennifer's management style affected the entire department. Maria confided that she was updating her resume, and James mentioned looking at job postings during lunch breaks. The collaborative energy that had made our team successful was being replaced by anxiety and second-guessing. But the breaking point came during my third weekly check-in, when Jennifer revealed the true scope of her documentation efforts. She pulled out a thick folder containing printed emails, meeting notes, and what appeared to be detailed observations of my daily work habits. "Sarah, I've been tracking your professional interactions over the past month," she began, opening the folder to reveal pages of handwritten notes. "I'm concerned about patterns I'm seeing in your communication style and work approach." The notes were extensive and invasive. Jennifer had documented the times I arrived at and left the office, the colleagues I spoke with during breaks, the clients I called without her explicit approval. She'd noted my defensive body language during meetings and my tendency to seek validation from peers rather than supervisors. "For example," Jennifer continued, pulling out a specific page, "on Tuesday you spent 15 minutes discussing campaign strategy with Maria instead of developing the concepts we'd outlined in your improvement plan. This suggests a preference for lateral collaboration over vertical accountability." The accusation was so absurd that I almost laughed. Jennifer was criticizing me for discussing work projects with a colleague, reframing normal professional collaboration as evidence of insubordination. But the documentation was real, and the implications were terrifying. She'd been watching me like a surveillance target, recording my behavior for use in building her case against me. "Jennifer, talking with colleagues about work projects is normal professional behavior. We've always collaborated as a team. And that collaborative approach is exactly what's preventing you from developing the independent creative vision that sophisticated storytelling requires," she replied. "Sarah, you consistently seek input from others instead of trusting your own artistic instincts. It suggests a fundamental lack of confidence in your creative abilities." The conversation spiraled from there, with Jennifer turning every aspect of my professional behavior into evidence of inadequacy. My research-based approach to campaign development became over-reliance on external validation. My attention to client feedback became inability to lead rather than follow. My collaborative relationships with colleagues became avoidance of creative responsibility. By the time I left her office, I understood that no amount of improvement would satisfy Jennifer's requirements. The performance plan wasn't designed to help me succeed. It was designed to document my failure in excruciating detail. Jennifer was building a legal fortress around my eventual termination, ensuring that when she finally fired me, the decision would appear entirely justified. That night, I made a decision that felt like jumping off a cliff without knowing if there was water below. I opened my laptop and began documenting everything. Every unreasonable demand, every impossible requirement, every instance of Jennifer reframing normal professional behavior as evidence of incompetence. If she wanted to play the documentation game, I would play it too. I started with the Morrison Industries campaign, detailing how Jennifer had rewritten my approved work without consultation and sent it directly to the client. I documented the Turner presentation disaster, including the client's specific complaints about Jennifer's academic approach. I recorded the impossible standards outlined in my performance improvement plan, noting how each requirement contradicted basic principles of effective client service. The process was both cathartic and terrifying. Each documented incident made Jennifer's behavior seem more obviously destructive, but it also made the scope of her campaign against me more apparent. She hadn't just decided to fire me, she'd embarked on a systematic effort to destroy my professional reputation in the process. As I wrote, I realized that Jennifer's approach followed a predictable pattern. She would create unreasonable standards, then criticize me for failing to meet them. She would cause problems with clients, then blame me for the relationship damage. She would isolate me from colleagues, then criticize me for poor collaboration. Every trap was carefully constructed to appear like legitimate management while actually being professional sabotage. But documentation wasn't enough. I needed allies, and my options were limited. Tom was sympathetic but politically constrained. My colleagues were supportive but powerless. HR would likely view this as a personality conflict rather than systematic harassment. The answer came from an unexpected source. While updating my LinkedIn profile late that night, preparing for the job search I knew was inevitable, a notification appeared that made my heart race. Amanda Foster, the creative director who'd left Meridian 6 months earlier to join a larger agency in Dallas, had been promoted to chief creative officer at a new Austin startup called Narrative Labs. Amanda and I had worked together on several successful campaigns during my first year at Meridian. She'd been a mentor figure, someone who'd encouraged my creative development and supported my ideas even when they challenged conventional approaches. More importantly, she'd left Meridian because of concerns about the company's direction, concerns that had proven prescient given Jennifer's arrival. I stared at Amanda's profile update for several minutes before deciding to take a risk. I sent her a brief congratulations message, mentioning that I'd love to catch up sometime and learn about her new venture. It felt like throwing a message in a bottle into the ocean, hoping someone would find it and rescue me. Amanda's response came within an hour. "Sarah, I'd love to catch up. Are you free for coffee this week? I've been hearing interesting things about changes at Meridian, and I'm always looking for talented people to join our team." The phrase "interesting things about changes at Meridian" suggested that word about Jennifer's management style was already spreading through Austin's creative community. More importantly, Amanda's mention of looking for talented people offered the possibility of an escape route from the trap Jennifer had constructed around my career. We scheduled coffee for Friday afternoon, and I spent the rest of the week oscillating between hope and terror. Jennifer's fourth weekly check-in was scheduled for Thursday, and I knew it would be another opportunity for her to document my alleged failures. But for the first time since receiving the performance improvement plan, I felt like there might be light at the end of the tunnel. The Thursday meeting followed the now familiar pattern of creative criticism disguised as professional development. Jennifer had prepared another folder of documentation, this one focused on my failure to demonstrate intellectual growth over the past month. According to her notes, my recent campaign proposals showed continued reliance on conventional approaches and, quote, resistance to sophisticated creative frameworks. But this time, instead of feeling defeated by her criticisms, I found myself analyzing her tactics with a kind of detached fascination. Jennifer's approach was remarkably consistent. Identify normal professional behavior, reframe it as a deficiency, then use that reframing to justify increasingly harsh treatment. It was psychological manipulation disguised as performance management, and understanding the pattern made it slightly less effective. "Sarah, I need to be direct with you about something," Jennifer said near the end of our meeting. "I'm not seeing the kind of dramatic improvement that would indicate you're capable of meeting our departmental standards. We may need to consider whether this role is the right fit for your current skill level." The threat was delivered with the same patient tone she used for all her criticisms, as if she was reluctantly acknowledging an obvious truth rather than actively working to destroy my career. But I heard it for what it was, the opening move in the endgame. Jennifer was preparing to fire me, and she wanted me to know that the decision was inevitable. "I understand your concerns," I replied, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. "I'm committed to continuing my professional development, regardless of where that path leads." Jennifer's expression flickered slightly, as if she'd detected something different in my response but couldn't quite identify what had changed. For the first time since she'd started documenting my alleged failures, I wasn't defending myself or pleading for understanding. I was simply acknowledging her position while reserving my own options. Friday afternoon couldn't come fast enough. I met Amanda at a coffee shop near the University of Texas campus, deliberately choosing a location far from Meridian's downtown office. Amanda looked exactly as I remembered her, energetic, confident, and radiating the kind of creative enthusiasm that had made working with her such a pleasure. "Sarah, you look tired," she said after we'd exchanged greetings and ordered our drinks. "How are things really going at Meridian?" The directness of her question caught me off guard, but I decided to be equally direct in my response. "They've been challenging since you left, especially since the new editorial services director started." Amanda's expression immediately became more serious. "Jennifer Morrison?" The fact that Amanda knew Jennifer's name confirmed my suspicion that word about her management style was spreading through the local creative community. "You've heard about her?" "I've heard some concerning things," Amanda replied carefully. "Several people in the industry have mentioned that Meridian's creative approach has become difficult to work with. Clients have been complaining about pretentious presentations and academic jargon in marketing campaigns." I felt a surge of validation hearing that Jennifer's reputation was already becoming problematic within the broader Austin creative scene. But Amanda's next words were even more encouraging. "Sarah, I'm going to be direct with you because I respect your work and I think you deserve to know what people are saying. Jennifer Morrison's name is becoming toxic in this town. She's alienated 3 major clients in the past month alone, and the feedback about her management style has been universally negative. Amanda leaned forward, her voice becoming more confidential. I've been approached by 2 different recruiters, asking if I knew anyone at Meridian who might be looking for new opportunities. The assumption in the industry is that talented people are going to start leaving because of her. The conversation that followed was part professional consultation and part therapy session. I told Amanda about the performance improvement plan, the impossible standards, the systematic documentation of normal behavior as evidence of inadequacy. She listened with growing anger, occasionally shaking her head or muttering comments about textbook workplace harassment. Sarah, what Jennifer is doing to you is a classic pattern, Amanda finally said. She's using academic authority to mask professional bullying. I've seen it before, usually with people who have impressive credentials but no real understanding of how creative businesses actually work. But Amanda's most important revelation came at the end of our conversation. I want you to know that Narrative Labs is actively recruiting creative talent from traditional agencies. We're building a team of people who understand that great storytelling serves the audience, not the ego of the storyteller. If you're interested, I'd love to have you come in for a conversation with our founding team. The offer felt like a lifeline thrown to someone drowning in an ocean of impossible expectations and systematic criticism. But accepting it would mean admitting defeat, acknowledging that Jennifer had successfully driven me out of a job I'd loved at a company where I'd been successful. Amanda, I need to think about it, I said. Leaving Meridian feels like letting Jennifer win. Sarah, staying at Meridian and letting her destroy your confidence and reputation isn't winning, Amanda replied firmly. Sometimes the best victory is removing yourself from a rigged game and finding a place where your talents are actually valued. As I drove home from our coffee meeting, I realized that Amanda was right. The game Jennifer was playing wasn't designed to improve my performance or serve our clients better. It was designed to eliminate me while making my elimination appear justified. No amount of effort or improvement would change the predetermined outcome. But leaving Meridian would also mean abandoning Maria, James, and the other colleagues who were suffering under Jennifer's management. It would mean letting her reshape the department according to her vision of intellectual superiority over practical effectiveness. It would mean that her toxic approach would become the new normal, driving away talent and alienating clients until the entire division collapsed. The decision I faced wasn't just about my own career. It was about whether to fight a battle I was almost certain to lose or retreat to safety, while others remained trapped in an increasingly dysfunctional situation. Both options felt like betrayal, of myself or of the colleagues who'd become friends. That weekend, Mike noticed my preoccupation, but misinterpreted its cause. You seem stressed about work lately, he observed while we were grocery shopping. Are you still having trouble adjusting to Jennifer's leadership style? The phrase adjusting to Jennifer's leadership style made me want to scream. Mike continued to frame my struggles as a personal failing rather than recognizing Jennifer's behavior as problematic. His unwavering admiration for her had created a wall between us that made honest communication impossible. I'm exploring some new opportunities, I said carefully. It might be time for a career change. Mike stopped pushing the cart and looked at me with genuine surprise. You're thinking about leaving Meridian? But you love that job. And you're finally working with someone who can really challenge you creatively. The disconnect between Mike's perception and my reality was so vast that I didn't know how to bridge it. In his mind, Jennifer represented everything positive about intellectual rigor and creative ambition. The idea that her challenging management style was actually destructive didn't seem to occur to him. Sometimes challenging becomes counterproductive, I said, trying to explain without directly criticizing his beloved book club leader. Sarah, are you sure you're not just intimidated by working with someone who operates at Jennifer's level? She's incredibly accomplished, and sometimes that can make people feel insecure about their own abilities. The suggestion that my problems with Jennifer stemmed from intimidation and insecurity rather than her objectively destructive behavior was the final straw. Mike had so thoroughly bought into Jennifer's narrative of intellectual superiority that he couldn't recognize professional harassment when his own wife was experiencing it. Mike, what if I told you that Jennifer's management style is actually harmful? That she's systematically undermining talented employees and destroying client relationships? He looked genuinely confused by the suggestion. I can't imagine Jennifer being harmful to anyone. She's one of the most thoughtful, ethical people I've ever met. Her insights about literature and creativity are incredible. But what if her approach to managing people doesn't match her insights about literature? Mike considered this for a moment, then shook his head. Sarah, I think you might be taking her feedback too personally. Jennifer has incredibly high standards, and sometimes that can feel overwhelming. But ultimately, working with someone who pushes you to be better is a gift, even if it's uncomfortable. As we finished our shopping in increasingly uncomfortable silence, I realized that Mike's investment in Jennifer's intellectual authority made him incapable of seeing her professional behavior clearly. He'd essentially decided that any conflict between his wife and his literary mentor must be my fault, and no amount of evidence would change that conclusion. The weekend passed slowly, with me alternating between researching narrative labs and crafting resignation letters I couldn't quite bring myself to send. Monday morning arrived with the familiar dread that had become my standard response to workdays, but this time it was accompanied by a strange sense of clarity. I was done trying to meet Jennifer's impossible standards. I was done defending myself against accusations of intellectual inadequacy. I was done pretending that systematic harassment was constructive feedback. Whether I stayed at Meridian or moved to Narrative Labs, I was finished playing Jennifer's game by her rules. The decision felt liberating and terrifying in equal measure. After months of questioning my own competence and trying to understand what I was doing wrong, I was finally ready to trust my own perception of reality. Jennifer Morrison was a destructive manager who used academic credentials to mask professional bullying, and no amount of effort on my part would change that fact. But acknowledging the truth about Jennifer was only the first step. The real question was what I planned to do with that knowledge, and whether I had the courage to act on it, even when doing so would upend everything I'd worked to build. Monday morning brought an email that changed everything. As I sat at my desk, still processing my weekend revelation about refusing to play Jennifer's game, my phone buzzed with a message from Amanda Foster. The subject line was simple but loaded with possibility. Urgent opportunity. Can we talk today? I opened the email with trembling fingers, expecting perhaps a follow-up to our coffee conversation, or maybe an invitation to interview at Narrative Labs. Instead, I found something far more significant. Sarah, I just received a call from Robert Kim at Meridian. Apparently, there's been some significant client feedback about the editorial services division, and upper management is conducting a comprehensive review of departmental performance. Robert specifically asked if I knew anything about the creative talent currently working under Jennifer Morrison. I think you need to know that your name came up specifically as someone whose work was highly regarded before the recent changes. Can we meet this afternoon? This could be the opening you need. I read the email 3 times before the full implications sank in. Robert Kim was Meridian's CEO, and if he was conducting a review of Jennifer's department based on client feedback, it meant the complaints had reached the highest levels of company leadership. More importantly, Amanda's mention that my name had come up specifically suggested that someone was distinguishing between Jennifer's failed approach and the quality of work that had existed before her arrival. My hands were shaking as I forwarded the email to my personal account and then deleted it from my work computer. If Jennifer discovered that I was communicating with Amanda about internal company politics, it would provide her with exactly the ammunition she needed to justify my immediate termination. The morning passed in a haze of forced productivity as I tried to maintain the appearance of normal work while my mind raced through possibilities. Was this the beginning of the end for Jennifer's reign of academic terror? Or was it simply another false hope that would ultimately lead to more disappointment? At 11:30, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Tom Rodriguez, and something in his tone when he answered suggested this wasn't a routine check-in. Sarah, can you come to my office? We need to discuss something important. Tom's office felt different when I entered. The usual casual atmosphere had been replaced by something more formal, more serious. He gestured for me to close the door and take a seat, his expression carefully neutral in the way that suggested he was choosing his words very deliberately. Sarah, I'm going to be direct with you because I think you deserve to know what's happening. Over the weekend, I received calls from 3 different clients expressing concerns about our recent creative direction. These weren't routine feedback calls. These were clients threatening to terminate their contracts if we don't address what they're calling, quote, fundamental misalignment with their business needs. My stomach dropped, but not with the familiar anxiety I'd come to associate with Jennifer-related problems. This felt different, more like the nervous energy that comes before vindication. Tom continued, his voice becoming more confident as he spoke. Turner's managing partner was particularly direct. He said that while he appreciated your recent efforts to realign their campaign strategy, he was concerned about the department's leadership and wanted to understand whether Meridian was still committed to practical, results-focused creative work. What did you tell him? I told him that Meridian has always prioritized client success over creative ego, and that any departure from that philosophy was unacceptable. Tom's expression hardened slightly. Then I had a very uncomfortable conversation with Robert Kim about why our clients are questioning our commitment to their success. The pieces were falling into place. The client feedback that Jennifer had dismissed as intellectual resistance was being interpreted by senior management as legitimate business concerns. The academic approach she'd championed as sophisticated storytelling was being recognized as pretentious nonsense that alienated paying customers. Tom, what does this mean for the department? It means that Robert is conducting a comprehensive review of our creative processes and management structures. It means that Jennifer's approach is being evaluated based on business results rather than academic credentials. Tom paused, studying my face carefully. And it means that your handling of client relationships over the past month has been noticed and appreciated at the highest levels of the company. The validation felt surreal after weeks of being told that my client-focused approach represented creative failure. But Tom's next words were even more encouraging. Sarah, Robert specifically asked me about your performance during this transition period. He wanted to understand how someone who had been so successful before Jennifer's arrival was suddenly on a performance improvement plan. I told him that your work quality hadn't declined, but that you were being evaluated against criteria that seemed disconnected from business objectives. I felt tears threatening and fought to maintain my composure. After months of questioning my own competence and wondering if Jennifer's criticisms were legitimate, hearing that senior management recognized the disconnect between her standards and actual business success was overwhelmingly emotional. What happens next? Robert wants to meet with you this afternoon. He's conducting individual interviews with everyone in the department to get a clear picture of how our creative processes have evolved over the past few months. Tom's expression became more serious. Sarah, this is your opportunity to tell your story honestly. Robert isn't looking for office gossip or personal complaints. He wants to understand how our approach to client service has changed and whether those changes are serving our business objectives. The meeting with Robert Kim was scheduled for 3 o'clock, giving me just enough time to prepare mentally while trying to maintain normal work productivity. I spent my lunch break sitting in my car, organizing my thoughts and reviewing the documentation I'd been keeping about Jennifer's management approach. At exactly 3 o'clock, I knocked on the door of Robert's corner office. The space was impressive but not intimidating, decorated with awards, recognizing Meridian's creative achievements and photos from successful campaign launches. Robert himself was younger than I'd expected, probably in his early 40s, with the kind of focused energy that suggested he hadn't built a successful agency by accepting mediocrity. Sarah, thank you for taking the time to meet with me, he began, gesturing for me to sit in one of the comfortable chairs arranged around a small conference table. I want to start by saying that this conversation is about understanding our current creative processes, not about evaluating individual performance. I'm trying to get a clear picture of how our approach to client service has evolved. The phrasing was careful and professional, but I understood what he was really asking. Robert wanted to know whether Jennifer's academic approach was serving clients effectively or creating problems that threatened business relationships. I appreciate the opportunity to share my perspective, I replied, trying to match his professional tone while preparing to be completely honest about my experience. Sarah, you've been with Meridian for over a year, and your work before the departmental restructuring was consistently excellent. Can you walk me through how your role and responsibilities have changed since Jennifer joined the team? The question opened the floodgates. I found myself describing the transformation from collaborative, client-focused creative development to academic theorizing that confused customers and alienated business partners. I explained how campaigns that had been developed based on market research and customer insights were being rewritten according to literary theory and postmodern philosophy. Robert listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions but mostly letting me tell my story without interruption. When I mentioned the Morrison Industries disaster, his expression became particularly focused. "Can you be more specific about what happened with that campaign?" I walked him through the entire sequence. My original research-based approach, the client's enthusiasm for the concept, Jennifer's unilateral revision based on environmental philosophy, and the client's confused rejection of messaging they couldn't understand. Robert's expression grew progressively more troubled as I detailed how Jennifer had positioned the client's practical concerns as intellectual limitations. "And how did you resolve the situation?" I worked with Tom to develop a compromise approach that incorporated some elevated concepts while maintaining clear communication about practical benefits. The client accepted the revision, but they expressed concerns about our department's direction. Robert nodded, making notes on a legal pad. "Sarah, I want to ask you about the performance improvement plan you're currently on. Can you help me understand what specific issues it's designed to address?" This was the moment I'd been dreading and hoping for simultaneously. I pulled out my copy of the performance improvement plan and walked Robert through each criticism, explaining how Jennifer had reframed normal professional behaviors as evidence of creative inadequacy. According to this document, I'm being criticized for prioritizing client satisfaction over creative vision, for relying too heavily on market research, and for seeking input from colleagues instead of developing independent artistic judgment. Robert's eyebrows rose as he scanned the document. These criticisms seemed to contradict the collaborative, client-focused approach that has made Meridian successful. "That's exactly how I felt reading them," I admitted. "It was like being told that everything I thought made me good at my job was actually evidence that I wasn't sophisticated enough for serious creative work." The conversation continued for nearly an hour, with Robert asking detailed questions about specific projects, client interactions, and team dynamics. Throughout the discussion, I tried to focus on business impact rather than personal grievances, describing how Jennifer's approach had affected client relationships and team morale without attacking her character or credentials. When Robert finally closed his notepad, his expression was thoughtful but determined. "Sarah, I want to thank you for your honesty and professionalism in this conversation. You've helped me understand some important disconnects between our stated values and our current practices. What happens now? Now I finish my interviews and review the documentation. But I want you to know that your perspective has been invaluable, and your handling of client relationships during this difficult period has been noted and appreciated." As I left Robert's office, I felt cautiously optimistic for the first time in months. The interview had gone better than I dared hope, and Robert's questions suggested that he understood the fundamental problems with Jennifer's approach. But I also knew that recognizing problems and solving them were different challenges entirely. Jennifer had been hired by senior management specifically to elevate the company's creative profile. Admitting that her approach was failing would require acknowledging that the executives who'd approved her hiring had made a significant mistake. That evening, I met Amanda at the same coffee shop where we'd had our previous conversation. Her expression was animated with barely contained excitement as she slid into the chair across from me. "Sarah, I have news that's going to change everything," she began without preamble. "Robert Kim called me an hour ago. He wanted to discuss the possibility of Narrative Labs partnering with Meridian on some upcoming projects, but more importantly, he asked specifically about your availability." I felt my heart racing. "What did you tell him?" "I told him that you were exactly the kind of strategic creative talent that makes partnerships successful, and that I'd be thrilled to work with you again in any capacity." Amanda's smile widened. "But here's the really interesting part. Robert mentioned that Meridian is considering some significant changes to their creative leadership structure, and that they want to ensure they retain their best talent during the transition." The implications were staggering. If Robert was asking about my availability while simultaneously discussing leadership changes, it suggested that Jennifer's position was in serious jeopardy, and that senior management was looking for ways to repair the damage her approach had caused. "Amanda, what do you think this means?" "I think it means that someone finally recognized that academic credentials don't automatically translate to effective creative leadership, she replied. And I think it means that your talent and professionalism during this difficult period have been noticed by the people who actually make decisions. We spent the next hour discussing possibilities and strategies. Amanda confirmed that Narrative Labs would offer me a position immediately if I decided to leave Meridian, but she also thought that staying might offer even better opportunities if the company was serious about restructuring their creative leadership. Sarah, you have leverage now that you didn't have a week ago, Amanda explained. Robert knows that you've been handling client relationships effectively while dealing with impossible management. If Meridian wants to keep their best creative talent and repair their client relationships, they need people like you. That night, I went home feeling more hopeful than I had since Jennifer's arrival. But the real test would come the next day, when I'd discover whether Robert's investigation would lead to actual changes or simply more carefully worded promises. Tuesday morning brought another surprise. At 9 o'clock, I received an email from Robert's assistant requesting my presence at a 10:30 meeting in the main conference room. The message mentioned that, quote, key department stakeholders would be present, but provided no other details about the meeting's purpose. When I arrived at the conference room, I found Tom, Maria, and James already seated around the large table. Jennifer was notably absent, and Robert Kim stood at the head of the room with a stack of documents and a serious expression. Thank you all for taking the time to meet this morning, Robert began. As you know, I've been conducting a comprehensive review of our editorial services division based on client feedback and internal assessment. I want to share the findings of that review and discuss the changes we'll be implementing immediately. Robert opened his folder and pulled out what appeared to be a formal report. Over the past month, we've received concerning feedback from multiple clients about our creative approach and communication style. 3 major accounts have threatened contract termination, and several others have expressed confusion about our strategic direction. He looked around the table, meeting each person's eyes before continuing. More troubling is the disconnect I've discovered between our stated commitment to client success and the management practices that have developed in this division. The performance improvement plans and evaluation criteria that have been implemented appear to penalize exactly the qualities that make our creative work effective. My heart was pounding as Robert continued his presentation. He was systematically dismantling Jennifer's approach without mentioning her by name, focusing instead on the business impact of academic management applied to practical creative work. Effective immediately, we're implementing several changes to ensure that our creative processes align with our business objectives and client needs. First, all performance improvement plans based on philosophical disagreements with commercial creative work are suspended pending individual review. I felt tears of relief threatening and struggled to maintain my composure. The impossible standards that had been hanging over my career for weeks were being officially recognized as inappropriate. Second, we're reinstating collaborative creative development as our standard process. Individual creative vision is valuable, but it must be balanced with market research, client input, and team collaboration. Robert's next announcement was even more significant. Third, we're restructuring the editorial services division to ensure that client relationships remain our primary focus. Tom Rodriguez will resume oversight of all client communications and creative approvals. The implications were clear. Jennifer's authority over client relationships was being removed, and the collaborative approach that had made our team successful was being officially restored. Finally, Robert continued, we're implementing new evaluation criteria that prioritize business results, client satisfaction, and professional collaboration over theoretical creative frameworks. When Robert finished his presentation, the room was silent for several moments. Then Maria spoke up with a question that was on everyone's mind. What about Jennifer? Is she still with the company? Robert's expression became more serious. Jennifer Morrison's employment with Meridian ended this morning by mutual agreement. She'll be pursuing opportunities that better align with her academic background and creative philosophy. The phrase mutual agreement was corporate speak for fired, but delivered in a way that preserved everyone's dignity. Jennifer's reign of academic terror was over, and the department could begin rebuilding the collaborative culture that had been systematically destroyed over the past few months. As the meeting concluded, Robert asked me to stay behind for a private conversation. When the others had left, he closed the door and returned to his seat across from me. Sarah, I want to personally apologize for what you've experienced over the past month. The management approach you were subjected to was completely inconsistent with Meridian's values and your proven track record of excellence. Thank you, Robert. That means more than you know. I also want to discuss your future with the company. Your handling of client relationships during this difficult period has been exemplary, and your professionalism throughout the review process has been noted by everyone involved. Robert pulled out another document, this one with Meridian letterhead and my name at the top. I'd like to offer you the position of Senior Creative Strategist, reporting directly to Tom but with significant autonomy over campaign development and client relationships. The promotion was everything I could have hoped for, complete with a substantial salary increase and the kind of creative freedom that Jennifer had systematically denied. But more importantly, it represented validation that my approach to creative work was valued and appreciated. The position comes with one additional responsibility, Robert continued. We'd like you to help develop new training protocols to ensure that future creative hires understand our commitment to collaborative, client-focused work. Your experience over the past month has highlighted some important gaps in our hiring and management processes. Accepting the position felt like stepping out of a nightmare and into a dream. After months of questioning my own competence and wondering if I understood what quality creative work actually required, I was being asked to help define standards for the entire company. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the promotion letter while Mike prepared dinner. For the first time in months, I was eager to share details about my workday. Mike, I have some news about work, I began, trying to contain my excitement. He looked up from chopping vegetables, his expression curious but cautious. Everything okay? You've seemed stressed about the job lately. Actually, everything is more than okay. I got promoted today. Senior Creative Strategist, significant salary increase, and I'll be helping develop company-wide creative standards. Mike's face lit up with genuine excitement. Sarah, that's incredible. Congratulations. I knew things would work out once you adjusted to working with Jennifer. Her high standards must have really pushed you to excel. The comment hit me like a cold slap of reality. Even now, even with Jennifer gone, and my career restored, Mike was crediting her with my success. In his mind, the promotion was evidence that her demanding management had made me a better creative professional. Mike, Jennifer isn't with the company anymore. She was let go this morning. His expression shifted to confusion, then concern. What happened? Was there a budget cut? No, there wasn't a budget cut. The company decided her management approach wasn't aligned with their values or business objectives. Mike set down his knife and turned to face me fully. I don't understand. Jennifer is one of the most qualified people I've ever met. Her insights about creativity and leadership are incredible. I realized that this was my opportunity to finally explain what had really been happening over the past few months. Mike's admiration for Jennifer had prevented him from seeing her destructive behavior. But with her gone and my vindication complete, maybe he could finally understand the truth. Mike, Jennifer's academic qualifications didn't translate to effective management. She created impossible standards, undermined client relationships, and systematically attacked the confidence of talented employees. But Sarah, maybe her standards just seemed impossible because they were so much higher than what you were used to. Sometimes growth requires being pushed outside your comfort zone. Even with overwhelming evidence of Jennifer's failure, Mike couldn't accept that his intellectual hero had been professionally destructive. His investment in her authority was so complete that he was willing to reinterpret her termination as evidence of corporate short-sightedness, rather than recognizing her behavior as problematic. Mike, the company conducted a comprehensive review and found that her approach was damaging client relationships and team morale. This wasn't about comfort zones. This was about professional competence. The conversation continued for another hour, with Mike gradually accepting that Jennifer was gone, while maintaining that her departure represented a loss for both Meridian and the creative industry generally. He never quite acknowledged that her management had been harmful, instead framing it as visionary thinking that was ahead of its time. But for the first time in months, Mike's inability to see Jennifer clearly didn't devastate me. I had my career back, my confidence restored, and official recognition that my approach to creative work was valuable and effective. Jennifer's opinion of my intellectual sophistication no longer mattered, and neither did Mike's continued admiration for her academic authority. Over the following weeks, the department underwent a remarkable transformation. With Jennifer's impossible standards removed and collaborative creativity restored, Maria and James rediscovered their enthusiasm for their work. New projects moved forward efficiently, client relationships improved dramatically, and the anxiety that had permeated our daily work environment gradually disappeared. My new role as senior creative strategist allowed me to work directly with clients on campaign development, while mentoring younger team members in research-based creative approaches. The promotion had given me exactly the kind of professional autonomy that Jennifer had systematically denied, and the results spoke for themselves. 3 months later, I received an invitation that brought the entire experience full circle. The Austin Creative Professionals Association asked me to speak at their annual conference about maintaining creative integrity in client-focused work. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was being asked to address exactly the balance that Jennifer had claimed was impossible to achieve. Standing before a room full of creative professionals, I told my story honestly. Not as a tale of personal vindication, but as a case study in how academic authority can mask professional incompetence, and how true creative excellence serves audiences rather than egos. In the audience, I spotted several familiar faces from Austin's creative community. Amanda Foster sat in the front row, smiling with obvious pride. Even Tom Rodriguez had taken time from his schedule to attend, his presence a reminder of how collaborative leadership could protect and nurture creative talent. But the most satisfying moment came during the question and answer session, when a young creative professional asked how to handle management that prioritizes theoretical frameworks over practical results. "Trust your instincts about what serves your audience," I replied. "Great storytelling isn't about impressing other storytellers with your intellectual sophistication. It's about connecting with people who need to hear your message. Never let anyone convince you that effectiveness is a form of creative failure." The applause that followed felt like vindication, not just for my own experience, but for every creative professional who'd ever been made to feel inadequate for prioritizing audience needs over artistic ego. After the presentation, as I was gathering my materials, a woman approached me with tears in her eyes. "Thank you for sharing your story," she said quietly. "I'm dealing with something similar at my agency, and I was starting to think I was the problem. Your presentation helped me understand that client-focused work isn't intellectually inferior. It's actually more challenging because it requires real skill." That conversation, more than any promotion or recognition, confirmed that my experience with Jennifer had served a larger purpose. By surviving her systematic attempts to undermine my confidence and maintaining my commitment to effective creative work, I'd discovered something important about the difference between genuine expertise and academic posturing. Jennifer Morrison had tried to rewrite my career as a tragedy, casting me as an intellectually limited creative professional who couldn't appreciate sophisticated storytelling. Instead, she'd inadvertently provided me with the material for a much better story, one about recognizing your own worth, standing up for your values, and understanding that true creative excellence serves others, rather than feeding the ego of its creator. The book club still meets at Grind and Bind every Tuesday evening, though Mike eventually stopped attending regularly. He never quite admitted that Jennifer's management style had been problematic, but he gradually stopped quoting her insights about creativity and leadership. Sometimes growth happens quietly, without dramatic revelations or explicit acknowledgments of error. As for Jennifer herself, I heard through Austin's creative network that she'd returned to academic work, taking a position at a small liberal arts college where her theoretical approach to storytelling could flourish without the messy complications of actual clients and business objectives. It was probably the right fit for her talents and temperament, and I genuinely hoped she'd find satisfaction in work that aligned with her philosophical approach to creativity. My story wasn't really about Jennifer Morrison, just as it wasn't really about workplace politics or creative differences. It was about learning to trust your own judgment when authority figures try to convince you that your strengths are weaknesses, your successes are failures, and your values are limitations. Sometimes the most important victory is simply refusing to accept someone else's definition of your worth. Everything else, including career advancement and professional recognition, flows naturally from that fundamental act of self-respect. The narrative Jennifer tried to write about my creative inadequacy became instead a story about resilience, professional integrity, and the difference between genuine expertise and impressive credentials. She'd attempted to rewrite my career as a tragedy, but the final chapter belonged to me, and I chose to make it a story of triumph. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.